Sarah Williams stood in front of her bedroom mirror that Tuesday morning, smoothing down her navy blue dress one last time. The 34-year-old elementary school teacher had received her jury duty notice 3 weeks ago, and today was the day she had to report to the downtown courthouse. She had never served on a jury before, but she felt excited about doing her civic duty. Sarah believed strongly in justice and fairness, values she tried to teach her third-grade students every day. The courthouse was a tall, imposing building made of gray stone that had stood in the center of town for over 60 years. Sarah parked her small Honda Civic in the public lot and walked toward the main entrance, her heels clicking on the concrete sidewalk. She carried a small purse and had dressed professionally, wanting to make a good impression as a potential juror. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah noticed 2 white police officers manning the metal detector. Officer Dale Mitchell was a heavy-set man in his early 40s with thinning brown hair and cold gray eyes. His partner, Officer Kevin Bradley, was younger and thinner, but carried himself with the same air of authority. Both men wore their uniforms with obvious pride, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Sarah placed her purse on the conveyor belt and walked through the metal detector. The machine immediately began beeping loudly, causing several people in line behind her to look up with curiosity. Officer Mitchell held up his hand to stop her from moving forward. "Step aside, please," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. Sarah did as she was told, moving to a small area next to the security station. She assumed this was routine and that they would quickly resolve whatever had caused the alarm. Officer Bradley picked up a handheld metal detecting wand and approached Sarah. "Raise your arms," he instructed. Sarah lifted her arms, feeling slightly uncomfortable as other courthouse visitors began to stare. The wand beeped near her chest area, which Sarah knew was probably her underwire bra, a common cause of metal detector alarms. "We need to do a more thorough search," Officer Mitchell announced, his voice carrying across the busy entrance hall. Sarah felt her cheeks begin to burn with embarrassment as more people turned to look at her. She noticed several white families with their children, all staring at her as if she were some kind of criminal. "I can assure you, officers, I am not carrying anything dangerous," Sarah said quietly, hoping to resolve the situation quickly and with minimal fuss. "I am here for jury duty, and I believe the alarm is just from my bra." Officer Bradley let out a short laugh. "That is what they all say," he replied, loud enough for nearby people to hear. "We have heard every excuse in the book." His comment sent a chill through Sarah as she realized this was not going to be a simple, routine search. "Ma'am, you need to remove your jacket," Officer Mitchell demanded, pointing at the light cardigan Sarah wore over her dress. Sarah hesitated, knowing that her dress underneath was sleeveless and would make her feel exposed in front of all these strangers. "Could we perhaps do this somewhere more private?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was trying to maintain her dignity while cooperating with what she hoped was standard security procedure. "We do not have time for special accommodations," Officer Bradley said impatiently. "Remove the jacket now, or we will have to call for backup and make this much more complicated for everyone." With trembling hands, Sarah slowly removed her cardigan, folding it carefully and handing it to Officer Mitchell. She felt vulnerable and exposed as dozens of eyes remained fixed on her. The officers examined her cardigan thoroughly, checking every pocket and seam, even though it was clearly just a thin, simple sweater with no place to hide anything dangerous. "The detector is still showing metal," Bradley announced after running the wand over Sarah again. "We are going to need you to come with us to the private screening room for additional security measures." Sarah's heart began to race. She had never been in trouble with the law, never even received a speeding ticket. The idea of being taken to a private room by these 2 officers terrified her, but she felt she had no choice but to comply. "Is this really necessary?" she asked. "I am just a school teacher here for jury duty." "Ma'am, we determine what is necessary for courthouse security," Mitchell replied sternly. "Your cooperation is required, not optional." The private screening room was small and windowless, with harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look cold and clinical. Officer Bradley closed the door behind them while Officer Mitchell positioned himself near the exit, blocking Sarah's path. The room felt suffocating, and Sarah could feel her anxiety growing by the second. "We need you to remove your dress so we can examine it properly," Bradley said, his tone becoming more aggressive. "The metal detector indicates you are hiding something, and we cannot allow you into the courthouse until we determine what it is." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Please, this is not necessary," she pleaded. "I am not hiding anything. I am a respected member of this community, a teacher. You can call my school to verify who I am. Take off the dress now, or we will charge you with obstruction of justice and failure to comply with security procedures," Mitchell threatened. "This is your final warning." With no other choice and fearing arrest, Sarah slowly and reluctantly removed her dress, standing in her undergarments while the two officers examined her clothing. They took their time, making inappropriate comments about her appearance and handling her dress roughly. When they finally returned her clothing, there was a visible tear in the fabric near the shoulder seam. "You can get dressed now," Bradley said with a smirk. "The metal was from your bra, just like you said, but we had to be sure." As Sarah put her torn dress back on, she realized that this entire ordeal had been unnecessary and motivated by something much darker than security concerns. The way the officers had looked at her, spoken to her, and treated her was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She felt humiliated, violated, and angry, but also frightened about what might happen if she complained. When Sarah finally emerged from the screening room, her dress wrinkled and torn, many of the same people who had witnessed her initial detention were still in the courthouse lobby. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with what appeared to be shame for having watched her humiliation without intervening. Sarah straightened her shoulders and walked toward the jury assembly room, determined not to let these officers see how deeply they had wounded her dignity. But inside she felt broken and questioning everything she had believed about justice, fairness, and her place in this community she had called home for over 10 years. Sarah walked through the courthouse hallways with her head held high, even though her torn dress made her feel exposed and ashamed. Every step reminded her of what had just happened in that small, cold room with Officers Mitchell and Bradley. Other people in the building seemed to avoid making eye contact with her, as if they were embarrassed by what they had witnessed at the security checkpoint. The jury assembly room was large and filled with about 50 potential jurors, all sitting in uncomfortable plastic chairs arranged in neat rows. Sarah found an empty seat near the back, hoping to blend in and avoid any more unwanted attention. She tried to focus on the paperwork she needed to fill out, but her hands were still shaking from the traumatic experience. An elderly white woman, with silver hair and kind blue eyes, approached Sarah during the first break. The woman wore a simple but elegant dress and walked with the confidence of someone who had lived through many decades of life's challenges. "My dear, I saw what happened to you at the security checkpoint," the woman said softly, sitting down in the chair next to Sarah. "I am Dorothy Henderson, and I want you to know that what those officers did to you was completely wrong and unacceptable." Sarah looked up, surprised that someone had actually approached her about the incident. Most people seemed to want to pretend they had not seen anything. "Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Henderson," Sarah replied quietly. "I was beginning to think maybe I was overreacting." "You were not overreacting at all," Dorothy said firmly. "I have been coming to this courthouse for over 30 years, and I have never seen anyone treated the way those officers treated you. What they did was not about security. It was about something much worse. Dorothy Henderson was not just any concerned citizen. She was the mother-in-law of Mayor Patricia Williams and the wife of retired Judge Harold Henderson, one of the most respected legal minds in the state. Dorothy had witnessed enough injustice in her 78 years to recognize discrimination when she saw it, and she was not the type of person to stay quiet about it. During the lunch break, Dorothy excused herself and went to the courthouse lobby to make some important phone calls. Her first call was to her daughter, Mayor Patricia Williams, who was in her office reviewing budget reports for the upcoming city council meeting. "Patricia, I need to tell you about something terrible that happened at the courthouse this morning," Dorothy began, her voice filled with anger and concern. "Two police officers humiliated and degraded a young black woman in front of dozens of people. They made her undress in a private room and tore her clothing, all because of a metal detector alarm that was obviously just from her undergarments. Mayor Williams felt her stomach tighten as she listened to her mother-in-law's detailed description of the incident. As an African-American woman herself, Patricia understood exactly what had happened and why. She had experienced similar treatment in her younger years, before she had gained the political power and respect that now protected her from such blatant discrimination. "Do you know the woman's name?" Patricia asked, already reaching for her notepad to write down the details. "Her name is Sarah Williams, and she is a school teacher," Dorothy replied. She handled herself with incredible dignity, but I could see how much they hurt her. "This cannot be allowed to continue, Patricia. Those officers represent our city, and their behavior reflects on all of us." After hanging up with her daughter, Dorothy called her husband, Judge Henderson, who was playing golf at the country club. Despite being retired, Harold Henderson still had significant influence in the legal community and maintained friendships with judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officials throughout the region. "Harold, I need you to make some calls," Dorothy said, explaining the situation once again. "This young woman deserves justice, and those officers need to face consequences for their actions." Judge Henderson had seen enough courtroom drama in his 40-year career to know that what Dorothy described was not just inappropriate behavior, but potentially criminal conduct. "I will call Chief Martinez immediately," he promised. "This kind of behavior has no place in our justice system." Dorothy's final call was to her longtime friend Margaret Chen, an investigative reporter for the local newspaper, who had built her career exposing corruption and injustice in their community. Margaret had won several awards for her fearless reporting on police misconduct and civil rights violations. "Margaret, I have a story for you," Dorothy said. "But more importantly, I have a young woman who needs someone to tell her story and make sure justice is served." Meanwhile, Sarah sat alone in the courthouse cafeteria, staring at a sandwich she had no appetite to eat. She kept replaying the morning's events in her mind, wondering if she should report what had happened or just try to forget about it and move on with her life. As a black woman in a predominantly white community, Sarah had learned to pick her battles carefully. Speaking up could mean losing her job, facing retaliation, or becoming a target for further harassment. But as she sat there thinking about her students, Sarah realized that she taught them every day about standing up for what was right, about treating all people with dignity and respect. How could she tell them to be brave and speak up against injustice if she was not willing to do the same thing herself? Sarah noticed that there seemed to be more activity than usual in the courthouse that afternoon. Officials in expensive suits were having serious conversations in corners, and additional security personnel had appeared throughout the building. She had no idea that her humiliating experience had already reached the highest levels of local government, or that a storm was beginning to brew that would soon engulf Officers Mitchell and Bradley. When the afternoon jury selection session began, Sarah found it difficult to concentrate on the legal proceedings. The lawyers were asking potential jurors about their ability to be fair and impartial, but all Sarah could think about was how unfairly she had been treated by the very people who were supposed to protect and serve the community. During another break, Margaret Chen appeared in the jury assembly room, having gotten past security with her press credentials. She approached Sarah carefully, not wanting to cause any additional stress or embarrassment. "Ms. Williams, my name is Margaret Chen, and I am a reporter with the local newspaper," Margaret said gently. "I understand you had a difficult experience here today, and I would like to help tell your story if you are willing." Sarah looked at the reporter with surprise and uncertainty. "I do not know if I want this to become a big public story," she said honestly. "I just want to do my jury duty and go home to my normal life." "I understand your hesitation," Margaret replied. "But sometimes staying silent allows injustice to continue. Other people might be treated the same way if no one speaks up about what happened to you." As the day continued, Sarah began to realize that her choice was not just about her own dignity and justice. It was about every other person who might walk through that courthouse entrance and face the same kind of discrimination and humiliation she had endured. Mayor Patricia Williams hung up the phone with her mother-in-law and immediately called Police Chief Robert Martinez, demanding an emergency meeting at City Hall. Her hands were shaking with anger as she thought about what Sarah Williams had endured at the courthouse that morning. Chief Martinez arrived at the mayor's office within 30 minutes, bringing with him the incident reports from the courthouse security checkpoint. As they reviewed the paperwork together, it became clear that Officers Mitchell and Bradley had filed a routine security report that made no mention of the extended search or the private room incident. "Robert, this report is completely inadequate," Mayor Williams said, sliding the papers across her desk. "According to my source, these officers subjected Ms. Williams to what amounts to a public strip search, and there is no mention of it anywhere in their documentation." Chief Martinez was a fair-minded man who had been trying to reform the police department since taking over as chief 3 years earlier. He had inherited several officers from the previous administration who still operated under old-school mentalities that had no place in modern law enforcement. "I will review the courthouse security footage immediately," Chief Martinez promised. "If what you are describing actually happened, these officers will face serious disciplinary action." "This is not just about discipline, Robert," the mayor replied firmly. "This is about civil rights violations, potential criminal conduct, and the reputation of our entire city. If this story gets out without us taking immediate and decisive action, it will be a disaster for everyone involved." Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Officers Mitchell and Bradley were finishing their shift, completely unaware that their morning's actions had already reached the highest levels of city government. They joked with other security personnel about the difficult woman they had to search, using language that revealed their true motivations had nothing to do with legitimate security concerns. Judge Henderson made good on his promise to call Chief Martinez, adding his voice to the growing chorus of respected community leaders demanding accountability. "Bob, I have known you for 15 years, and I know you are trying to clean up that department," the retired judge said. "But incidents like this one cannot be swept under the rug or handled with just a slap on the wrist." Margaret Chen spent the afternoon researching Officers Mitchell and Bradley, discovering that both men had previous complaints filed against them for excessive force and discriminatory behavior. However, most of those complaints had been dismissed or resulted in minimal punishment, allowing the officers to continue their pattern of misconduct. When Chief Martinez finally reviewed the courthouse security footage, he felt sick to his stomach. The video clearly showed the officers' unprofessional behavior, their obvious enjoyment of Sarah's humiliation, and their complete disregard for proper security procedures. What they had done to Sarah Williams was not about safety or security. It was about power and prejudice. "Get Mitchell and Bradley in here immediately," Chief Martinez told his secretary. "And call the Internal Affairs Division. We have a serious problem that needs to be addressed right now." The two officers arrived at the police station that evening expecting to go home after their shift, but instead found themselves facing their police chief and two internal affairs investigators in a small conference room. The security footage was playing on a large monitor, showing their treatment of Sarah Williams in devastating detail. "Can either of you explain why you subjected this woman to such an extensive and humiliating search for what was obviously just a bra under wire?" Chief Martinez asked, his voice cold and professional. Officer Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We were just following standard security protocols, Chief," he said. "The metal detector indicated a potential threat, and we had to investigate thoroughly. Standard protocols do not include making someone remove their dress in a private room for an underwire bra," the Internal Affairs investigator replied. "And they certainly do not include the kind of comments and behavior we can see on this video." Officer Bradley remained silent, realizing that their actions looked much worse on camera than they had felt in the moment. The video showed clearly that they had targeted Sarah Williams for treatment that other courthouse visitors did not receive, and that their behavior had been motivated by something other than legitimate security concerns. "Both of you are suspended, without pay pending a complete investigation," Chief Martinez announced, "and I am recommending that the district attorney review this case for possible criminal charges." The two officers left the police station that evening in shock, suddenly realizing that their casual racism and abuse of power might cost them their careers, their reputations, and possibly their freedom. They had treated Sarah Williams as if she were less than human, never imagining that their actions would have serious consequences. The next morning, Sarah Williams woke up in her small apartment still feeling the emotional weight of what had happened at the courthouse. She had barely slept, replaying the incident over and over in her mind and wondering if she should have handled things differently. As she got ready for work, Sarah noticed that the local newspaper had been delivered to her front door. The headline made her gasp: "Courthouse security officers suspended after alleged civil rights violation." Margaret Chen had worked through the night to investigate and write the story, using information from Dorothy Henderson, Mayor Williams, and several other sources who had witnessed the incident. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the article, which described her experience in detail while protecting her privacy by using only her first name and general profession. The story explained how 2 white police officers had subjected a black school teacher to an unnecessary and humiliating search that appeared to be motivated by racial bias rather than legitimate security concerns. By the time Sarah arrived at Riverside Elementary School that morning, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets and was spreading across social media. Her principal, Mrs. Foster, called her into the office before classes began. "Sarah, I read about what happened to you at the courthouse," Mrs. Foster said with genuine concern. "I want you to know that the entire school district supports you, and we will provide whatever assistance you need during this difficult time." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She was grateful for the support, but she also worried about how the publicity might affect her students and her ability to do her job effectively. "I just want to focus on teaching and try to move forward," Sarah said. "I understand, but I think you should know that several parents have already called to express their support for you," Mrs. Foster replied. "They are proud that their children have a teacher who stands up for what is right." Meanwhile, Officers Mitchell and Bradley were discovering just how quickly their lives could change. Local news crews had gathered outside their homes, and reporters were asking their neighbors for comments about the suspended officers. Both men had received calls from the police union promising legal representation, but they were also hearing rumors that the mayor and police chief were determined to make an example of their case. Officer Mitchell's wife answered their home phone that morning to find a reporter on the other end asking for a statement about her husband's actions. "My husband is a good man who is just doing his job," she said defensively. "He would never intentionally hurt anyone or treat them unfairly." But as more details emerged about the officer's history of complaints and questionable behavior, it became clear that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of misconduct that had been overlooked for too long. Chief Martinez held a press conference that afternoon, standing behind a podium at City Hall with Mayor Williams beside him. "The Riverside Police Department does not tolerate discrimination or abuse of power in any form," he announced to the gathered reporters. "We are committed to investigating this incident thoroughly and taking appropriate action to ensure it never happens again." Margaret Chen raised her hand from the audience. "Chief Martinez, can you tell us what specific charges these officers might face, and whether this investigation will examine other complaints against them?" "We are working with the district attorney's office to determine what charges, if any, are appropriate," Chief Martinez replied. "And yes, we will be reviewing the complete service records of both officers to identify any patterns of misconduct." The story was now gaining national attention, with civil rights organizations and legal advocacy groups calling for federal involvement in the case. Sarah Williams had become an unwilling symbol of the ongoing struggle against police misconduct and racial discrimination in the justice system. That evening, Sarah received a phone call from a lawyer representing the American Civil Liberties Union, offering to help her file a civil rights lawsuit against the city and the 2 officers. "Ms. Williams, you have the right to seek compensation for what you endured, and a lawsuit would help ensure that this kind of treatment stops happening to other people," the lawyer explained. Sarah listened carefully, but she was still overwhelmed by how quickly her quiet life had become a public spectacle. All she had wanted was to serve on a jury and fulfill her civic duty. Now she found herself at the center of a controversy that was growing larger by the day. 3 weeks after the courthouse incident, Officers Mitchell and Bradley found themselves sitting in Mayor Patricia Williams's office, no longer wearing their police uniforms, but dressed in civilian clothes like any other citizens seeking help from their elected officials. Their suspension had become a termination, and they were now facing federal civil rights charges that could send them to prison for several years. The two men looked very different from the confident, arrogant officers who had humiliated Sarah Williams at the courthouse security checkpoint. Mitchell had lost weight and developed dark circles under his eyes from stress and sleepless nights. Bradley kept fidgeting with his hands and seemed unable to make direct eye contact with the mayor. "Your Honor, we know we made mistakes," Mitchell began, his voice cracking slightly. "We never meant for things to go as far as they did. We were just trying to do our jobs and keep the courthouse safe." Mayor Williams sat behind her desk, studying the two men who had created a crisis for her administration and brought national scrutiny to their small city. She had received hundreds of phone calls and emails from citizens expressing both outrage and support for various aspects of the situation. "Gentlemen, let me be very clear about something," the mayor said in a calm but stern voice. "What you did to Ms. Williams was not a mistake. It was a deliberate choice to abuse your authority and humiliate a citizen based on her race. The evidence is overwhelming, and the entire incident was captured on video." Officer Bradley finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "We understand that now, ma'am. We have had time to think about our actions and we realize how wrong we were. We are hoping you might be willing to speak to the federal prosecutors on our behalf." The mayor leaned back in her chair, considering the request. Both officers were facing charges under federal civil rights laws that carried potential sentences of up to 10 years in prison. Their families had been receiving threats, they had lost their jobs and their pensions, and they were struggling to find lawyers willing to represent them. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Mayor Williams asked. "We are asking you to tell the prosecutors that we are not bad people, just officers who made poor decisions in a moment of stress," Mitchell replied. "We have families, children who depend on us. We are willing to accept responsibility and make amends, but we do not deserve to have our lives destroyed over one incident." The mayor stood up and walked to her office window, looking out at the courthouse where the incident had occurred. She thought about Sarah Williams, who had shown incredible grace and dignity throughout the ordeal, never seeking revenge but simply asking for justice and respect. "You want me to show you mercy that you did not show Ms. Williams," the mayor said without turning around. "You want me to consider your families while you gave no consideration to how your actions would affect her life and well-being. Please, Mayor Williams," Bradley pleaded. "We know we were wrong. We have learned from this experience and we will never make the same mistakes again. We are begging you to help us." The mayor turned back to face the two men, seeing them now as broken individuals who had finally realized the consequences of their actions. She thought about the principles of justice, forgiveness, and redemption that were supposed to guide their community. "I will consider your request," she said finally. "But any recommendation I make will depend on several conditions. First, you must publicly apologize to Ms. Williams and acknowledge that your treatment of her was motivated by racial bias. Second, you must agree to participate in a community education program about civil rights and police accountability. And third, you must accept whatever punishment the court deems appropriate without complaint or appeal." The two officers looked at each other, realizing that the mayor was offering them a small chance at leniency in exchange for complete accountability and public humiliation. It was not the easy solution they had hoped for, but it might be their only hope of avoiding lengthy prison sentences. "We accept your conditions," Mitchell said after a long pause. "We will do whatever is necessary to make this right." As the officers left her office, Mayor Williams reflected on how the incident had changed their entire community. Sarah Williams had returned to her teaching job and was working with civil rights organizations to prevent similar incidents from happening to others. The courthouse had implemented new security procedures and sensitivity training for all personnel, and the police department was undergoing a complete review of its policies and practices. The two officers who had once held positions of authority and respect in their community were now facing an uncertain future, their careers destroyed and their reputations in ruins. They had learned, perhaps too late, that actions have consequences, and that treating any person with dignity and respect is not optional but required, especially for those entrusted with public authority. Their plea for mercy would ultimately be decided by a federal judge, But their request had already served an important purpose by forcing them to confront the reality of what they had done and to acknowledge the pain they had caused to Sarah Williams and the broader community.